Hey everybody, and welcome to Bits of Board, where we're talking board games, miniatures, cards, and dice. My name's Michael, and today we are checking out the latest release from Cole Worley through Leader Games. This one is Oath. Oath is an area control, action point spending, resource management kind of game where players take on the role of different societal classes vying to be the ruler of their nation. It has variable setup, variable player goals, and variable win conditions, meaning no two games are ever going to be the same. And that's from game box to game box as well, with setup and content of the next game completely dependent on how the last was finished. From the rulebook, it is a game about history, what gets forgotten, who gets left behind, and how power moves through one part of society to another. It's a very unique concept captured in a very unique way here, and this video is all about getting you guys comfortable and understanding of the hows and whys scattered throughout this game. And hopefully by the time this one hits your table, you are ready to go. Setup for this game varies between the first play and all subsequent plays. Basically, you will place the game mat in the center of the play area and then seed it with sites, denizens, and relics, depending on how the last game ended. Setup for the first game is covered in the Oath playbook, which I'm fairly certain you have to follow for your first game. But basically, we have our sites. Plains, mountains, and rocky coast are placed face up at the top of the cradle, provinces, and hinterland regions respectively, with 5 other sites placed face down in the spaces beneath. Next, we set up the starting denizens of each region. Longbows placed next to the plains, taming charm at the mountainside, and elders at the rocky coast. These represent the powers available to players ruling these respective sites over the course of the game. Within each region, we also have a discard pile. In this first game, we're going to have 3 cards in the cradle, 3 cards in the provinces, and 5 cards in the hinterlands. All remaining cards used in this game are placed in a stack at the bottom of the board as the world deck. These contain not just denizens, but vision cards as well, which may introduce new victory conditions as the game progresses. Finally, we set up our relics, with here only one beginning in play, placed face down next to the mountainside. The rest are placed in their spot beside the world deck. Now, in this first game, all face-down cards are set by the game, and like I said, I'm not sure if this game can begin any other way. Doesn't matter though, as I think the idea is that Oath, after the first game and onwards, will always begin with a varied setup. Let's continue setting up the board though, and now we'll go ahead and place our track markers. The first goes on the first space of the round track, telling us how many rounds the game has gone on for, and the other tracker goes in the first space of the Visions Drawn track, which counts how many vision cards have been drawn from the world deck. Here we can see that the more that are drawn, the more expensive the action will become. Next, we fill the favor banks, 3 favor in each suited bank, or 4 if playing a 5 or 6 player game. This first game though is 4 players only. We then place all our other game supplies off to the side, favor, secrets, attack and defense dice, and the end die. We're also going to place our game's chronicled goal reference. This is the win condition unique to this game. We're also going to place our 2 banners, the banner of the people's favor with a favor token on top, and the banner of the darkest secret with a secret token on top. These relate to some of the other win conditions in the game, but can be taken to improve the effectiveness of some in-game actions. And now with the main board pretty much all set up and ready to go, we turn to our player setup. First, each player takes a player board. The player given the Chancellor board sits closest to the cradle, also taking the Imperial Reliquary board with 4 relics drawn from the relic deck and the Grand Scepter relic card. Next, they'll take their purple warbands, placing 3 atop their player board. They place their supply marker on the leftmost space of the supply track, gain an advisor card, placing it face down next to their board, 2 favors, and 1 secret. Finally, they place the Oathkeeper title tile atop their player board so it covers their name. This basically shows us that the Chancellor is on the way to winning the game. For this first game, all other players will use the exile side of their player board, but in future games this can be decided and the citizen side can be used instead. Players here should take the warbands of their colour, placing 3 atop their board, place their supply marker in the leftmost space of the supply track, take an advisor, again placed face down next to the player board, and 1 favour and 1 secret. Here we should note that for future games, citizens will use the Chancellor's warbands instead of their own colour. All that's left now is to get our players onto the map. The Chancellor places 2 warbands from beside their dashboard on the top site of the cradle and then 1 more on each of the other face-up sites that has at least 1 denizen or face-up relic. Finally, players place their pawns, the larger wooden pieces, with the Chancellor again placing in the top site of the cradle, with citizens or exiles choosing whichever face-up site they like. And with that, we are ready to begin. Each game of Oath will begin with 1 of 4 Oathkeeper cards in play. These detail the win conditions for each game. The Oathkeeper of Supremacy drives players to rule the most sites. The Oathkeeper of the People drives players to control the banner of the people's favour. The Oathkeeper of Devotion drives players to control the banner of the darkest secret. And finally, the Oathkeeper of Protection drives players to control the most relics and banners combined. The first game you will play, players will be competing for supremacy, which is good because ruling is an important lesson to learn early in your time with the game. That said, the banners and relics favoured by the other Oathkeepers, they still play an important part of the game and victory, but more on alternate win conditions in a sec. For the moment though, let's just keep to the Oathkeeper of Supremacy and look at what it means to rule a site. To rule a site, a player must simply have warbands on it, and because only one player's warbands can exist on a site at a time, any number is sufficient to be ruler. Here, after setup, we can see the Chancellor rules all 3 face-up sites, and because of this, we've given them the Oathkeeper title, showing all other players that they are at the forefront of winning the game. Now, while they're in the lead from the beginning, they can only actually claim victory from the 5th round onwards. So all they've got to do is hold on to that Oathkeeper tile, and if at the end of the 5th round and all subsequent rounds, the Chancellor is Oathkeeper, they roll the end die. Here, the game will end on a 6. At the end of the 6th round, the game will end on a 5+. At the end of the 7th round, the game will end on a 3+. And at the end of the 8th round, the game simply ends with war exhaustion. Here, the key point to remember is that the end die is only rolled if the Chancellor is Oathkeeper. So if other players want to stay in the running, they're going to have to keep that tile away from them. Well, exiles at least. Citizens? Okay, so if the end die is rolled and it causes the end of the game with the Chancellor as Oathkeeper, they would win, unless of course they'd offered another player citizenship. So we will talk on citizens, but we'll do that just a little bit later. For now, all you need to know is that if the Chancellor ends the game and one of the other citizens has met the successor requirement of the Oathkeeper card, well, they win instead. Let's leave that there for the moment. What about the other players? Exiles. Luckily, they can actually win too, by becoming a usurper. Here, should an exile, not the Chancellor, meet the requirements of the Oathkeeper card, they take control of the Oathkeeper title, placing it on their board. On their next turn, if they still have it, they flip it to Usurper. And at the beginning of the next turn, well, they win. Now, special note here, if the game ends on the 8th round and the exile player has not yet flipped their Oathkeeper title, it's okay, they still win. Now, it can be pretty tough to win as an exile. They really do begin the game on the back foot after setup. So they have a second path to victory. They can become visionaries. This can occur once a player draws and reveals a vision from the world deck, and if they meet its requirements at the start of their next turn, well, they win. Now, these conditions are actually the same as the 4 Oathkeeper conditions, but require players to not only have declared their vision by revealing it on their player board, but also to have explored a good portion of the world deck, revealing some of the other visions. This essentially means that exiles can win the game without having to hold a win condition for 3 whole turns, and they essentially have access to all 4 win conditions each game. It just depends on what they draw and their ability to push through the world deck. Now, there is a 5th vision card floating around, except this is a false vision called Conspiracy. And while it does count towards the number of revealed visions, it has no victory condition associated. Now, here I'll mention that only exiles can actually reveal a true visionary card onto their player board, chancellors and citizens either having to discard them or play them as face-down advisors. This false vision though, well, it's a fair game to be played by all the players. Right, so that's pretty much all I'm going to say on winning the game for now. I won't cover the other Oath Keepers yet. Let's actually get into some gameplay first, so we can later talk about those elements with context. A game of Oath can last for up to 8 rounds. Over each round, players will each take 1 turn, consisting of a wake phase, action phase, and a rest phase. After each player has taken a turn, the round marker advances and a new round begins. On their turn, each player, no matter who they are, Chancellor, Exile, or Citizen, will have the same options, just with their goals probably being different depending on what they're trying to do to win the game. Let's go through these phases in detail. The Wake phase has Exiles check for their win condition. Have they won as Visionary, Usurper, or do they just need to flip their Oathkeeper card? Additionally, some sites allow players to take its gathered resources, and some powers on cards refer to use during the Wake phase, and this is where they're resolved. Wake phase done. The next phase is the Act phase, and it is a lot busier. Here, players will utilize their supply to take major actions, or take minor actions which will cost no supply. There are 6 major actions, which I'll cover in detail in a sec. For now though, we can see we have Search, where players play Denizen or Vision cards. Muster, where players utilize Denizen cards placed to gain warbands. Trade, where players use Denizen cards to trade for favor or secrets. Recover, where players take a relic at their site. Campaign, where players attack sites, relics, and other players' banners and pawns with warbands on their player board. And finally, Travel, where players move their pawn to a face-up or face-down site on the map. Each major action costs a number of supply, and if a player no longer has any supply left, or they do not wish to spend anymore, they move into their rest phase. Here, players first return all resources spent to denizens, basically freeing up cards for the next player's turn. Spent favor tokens are returned to their relevant bank, with secrets instead returning to their player's player board. Then players will refresh their supply, gaining additional points based on how many warbands they have left next to their player board. Rest phase over, we move to the next player's turn, and if all players have acted, the round marker advances. If the Chancellor has the Oathkeeper title and we're at the 5th round or beyond, we roll the end dice to see if the game comes to an end. If not, the next round is played as normal, but if it does, a winner is declared and a new Chronicle is written, basically setting the game state for the next play. We'll cover this part right at the end though. For now, let's look at the actions in detail. The search action has a player drawing cards from one of 2 available decks, with costs dependent on which deck is chosen. The first is the world deck, which can be searched from any region, with supply costs starting at 2 supply, increasing up to 4 based on how many visions have been drawn. The second is a player's current region discard deck with supply costs fixed at 2. When taken, the search action has a player drawing 3 cards, one at a time from their chosen deck. Throughout this process, if a player ever draws a vision from the world deck, they must stop drawing no matter how many cards have been drawn and resolve the remainder of the action. Next, a player looks at each of the cards gained. Here, a player must choose one to play, discarding the rest into the next region's discard deck. If a player searches in the cradle, they discard into the provinces deck. Searching in the provinces discards into the hinterlands, and if a player searches in the hinterlands, they discard to the cradle. Only then, after discarding, will the player play their remaining card. Denizen cards can be played in one of 2 locations, either face up at the player's current site, or face up or face down as an advisor. In some cases, there are restrictions, and if a card has a tree symbol, it can only be played face up to a site or face down as an advisor. And if instead the card has a pawn symbol, it can only be played as an advisor, again, face up or face down. Now, there is a third symbol representing that a card is locked, that is the chain. This means once the card has been played, it cannot be discarded, moved, or swapped until a new game is set up in the Chronicle. Cards, when played to a site, grant the searching player 1 favor and expand on the actions available when both taking actions at that site or taking actions when ruling that site. Catch is though, sites have a maximum number of denizens they can support, so it may not always be possible to place. Cards played as advisors can be placed face up to expand on actions taken by that player only, or can be played face down, basically saving the card for use at a later stage through a minor action. Whether face up or face down though, a player can only ever keep 3 cards as advisors. Now, like I said, should a vision be drawn from the world deck as a part of the draw process, a player must stop drawing, and while they will eventually proceed with the action, no further cards will be drawn. First though, the player must advance the search cost track by 1, potentially increasing the supply cost for further search actions taken. Once done, they discard back down to 1 card and pick a card to play as normal. Now, a player can choose to discard the drawn vision card, no changes there, but if they decide to play it, they place it on their player board, noting that it doesn't count as an advisor. This placement now means that the player is now in the running to fulfill its victory condition as listed on the card. Here, it's worth noting that if an exile already has a vision placed and they want to play another one, they simply replace and discard the old card. The second action, muster, costs 1 supply and 1 favor, and allows a player to place 2 warbands onto their player board. Now, this is not something that you can just do over and over again, and to be able to take this action, the player's pawn must be at a site with a free denizen card, one that does not yet have any tokens on it. When the action is taken, the spent favor is then placed on one of these denizen cards to show that it's been used and that it cannot be used again this turn. Mustering troops is a way that players build their armies for their campaign actions, but having more troops on the board means less supply recovered each rest phase, and potentially less actions available next turn, so it's a bit of a balance. The third action, trade, costs 1 supply, allowing a player to either trade favors for secrets or secrets for favors. Like the muster action, this also requires the use of a free denizen card at a player's current site. To trade for favor, a player places one of their secrets on a free denizen card and takes 1 favor plus 1 more for each face-up advisor they have matching the suit of the card traded with. Favor gained is taken from the favor bank matching that same suit, and if there's not enough, they simply take however much they can. Trading for secrets works in a very similar way, except a player simply places 2 of their favour on a free denizen card, taking 1 secret for each face-up advisor matching the suit of the card traded with. Overall, trading increases a player's stored resources, which are in turn used to fund in-game actions. Favour is commonly used to pay for things like taking actions on denizen cards, mustering warbands, and, as you'll see in a sec, collecting relics. And while secrets are often used the same way, they serve an even more important function, and that is the generation of favour. With a trade rate of up to 4-to-1, secrets are a goldmine for favours, and unlike favour, most spent secrets are returned to a player at the end of the turn they are spent, which means they can be used over and over again. Now, there are some cases where actions require secrets to be burnt, and they are not returned to a player, instead returned to the supply. Permanent loss of secrets can be hard to deal with, so a very major gameplay warning here, guys. Do not burn your last secrets lightly. You essentially rely on these to fund your actions, and they can be very hard to get back once gone. The 4th action is Recover, and it's using this action that players are able to collect the relics found at their site or one of the banners situated beside the board. This action costs 1 supply and a cost determined by what is taken and from where. The cost for taking a relic is indicated at the bottom right-hand corner of a site. The cost may be favour spent to an indicated bank, or burnt secrets, or in this case, burnt favour, returning them to the supply. Once paid for though, the relic is taken and placed next to the recovering player's supply, with no limit on the number of relics kept. Relics are a great way to acquire new powers and even count towards some victory conditions, but as you'll see in a sec, they can be stolen through an opposing player's campaign. Now, I've not spoken on these much, but I'll note here that there is a minor action, remember costing no supply, that allows a player to peek at a face-down relic in their site. This basically allows players to know what they have nearby without drawing the attention of players in other regions and on different sites. Now, no matter where a player is, they're also able to recover banners, and these are handled a little differently. Instead, banners begin off in the supply with a single resource placed atop them. To take a banner, a player has to pay any amount of resources in the type placed, so long as it is more than what is currently placed atop it. Now, banners are slightly more complicated than relics, with their effects being a lot further reaching. So that said, I'm going to cover them separately after we've finished looking at our actions. Stay tuned though. For now, let's move on to our next action, Campaign. And this is a fairly big one, but it'll finally have players making use of their mustered troops. This action, when taken, costs 2 supply. First, a player must declare which player they are attacking, with the defending player needing to have some presence at the same site as the attacking pawn. This presence can either be ruler of the site, or simply having their pawn at the site. Or in the case that no one was ruler of the site, the target can be bandits, a neutral player ruling all of the unruled sites. After choosing their defending player, the attacking player must declare exactly what they are targeting as part of their campaign, and this can be any number of targets, so long as the player's current site holds the first. Let's say here our orange player is going up against the Chancellor, as they are currently rulers of the mountains. One of their targets has to be the mountains. Additional targets chosen can be any of the following 3 options. Number 1, any other site that the defending player rules. If their pawn is at the same site as the attacking player, the pawn itself and its favour can be targeted. And again for this one, the pawn must be at the same site as the attacking players. Any of that player's relics. Here we'll note that relics in the Imperial Reliquary cannot be targeted through campaign. The Chancellor's Grand Scepter, though, that is fair game. Once all targets have been decided, all that's left is the battle itself. First, we work out how many dice the defender will roll. For each target, the player will gain a number of defense dice as displayed for sites in the top right-hand corner. For pawns and favor, we add 2 dice. And for relics, the defense value is listed on the card as well. Additionally, if the defender holds the Oathkeeper title, they add 1 more dice. 2 more if they are the usurper. Defense done, we move on to the campaigning player's attack dice, and they simply take 1 dice per warband on their player board. Once players can see the number of dice that will be rolled, they each have the opportunity to use their battle plans, cards with a crown symbol in sites that that player controls, or those face up in their advisors. First, the attacker declares their battle plans, and then the defender. Here we can see that the Chancellor's longbows alter the number of attack dice with plus or minus 1, useful for attacking or defending. Here our orange player will lose 1 die. Here we can see the mountains also have a persistent power, which reduces the number of attack dice rolled. This campaign from red would not be a good idea. Whatever dice are left in the pool at this stage are the dice that will be rolled. For defenders, first count up each of the rolled shields, and then apply any 2 times result, each doubling the resulting defense. For attackers, count up each filled sword, gaining 1 point for each, and then each pair of hollow swords, 1 point per full pair. The sum is the total attack value. Finally and immediately, kill off 1 warband on the attacking player's player board for each skull result rolled. At this point, compare the attack value to the defense value. Here, our attacker scores 0 attack, as they would need to have rolled 2 empty swords to gain 1 point. Our defender here has 2 shields, granting 2 defense, plus 1 more for each warband present at targeted sites. The result is 4 to none. If the attack was greater, the campaign is a success, hooray! But like here, if it's equal to or less, the attack is failed. Well, almost. See, the attacking player is now given one final opportunity to take victory, and that is through sacrifice of their warbands. For every warband sacrificed, they gain plus 1 attack, recalculating the score. If the campaign still fails, the attacker gains nothing and loses half of their warbands on their player board, rounding down. If it was a success though, the defender would have to kill half of the warbands that contributed to their defense, returning the rest to their player board. Then the attacker would place any number of warbands from their player board onto sites that they now rule, then take any targeted relics into their supply. If as a part of the attack, the attacker had targeted the defender's pawn and favor, they would have to burn half of their favor, rounding down, and then move the defender's pawn to a site of the attacking player's choice. Campaigning is a player's main way of being a pest and taking what doesn't belong to them. Sites, associated denizens, and relics are all up for grabs, with some being integral to victory within the game. Yes, banners can be targeted here as well. Campaigning is a very powerful action, which, if performed correctly, can shift the balance of play entirely, but can also be very risky, awarding no gain for a lot of cost. So guys and gals, campaign wisely. The final action is travel, and this costs anywhere from 1 to 4 supply, as displayed at the top of a player's current region. Here we can see all movement would cost 2 supply. 2 supply to the cradle, 2 supply to another site in the region, and 2 supply to the hinterlands. The travel action is how players move from site to site and explore the face-down locations scattered across the board. If a player chooses to move to a face-down site, they will flip it face up. Flipped sites may require favor or secrets to be placed, which will be taken by players during the wake phase, or in some cases require relics to be placed face down off to the side. These, like I said, can be taken through a recover action. Main actions done. So on top of those, we do have a few minor actions that I've sort of alluded to throughout, and I'm going to quickly run them by just here. The first 2 minor actions are to do with a player's advisors. Number 1, on their turn, a player can flip one of their advisors face up, just as though it were played on a search action. Basically, it acts as a delayed play of a card taken. Number 2, A player can choose to discard one of their advisors, making room for a subsequent search action, for example. Number 3, a player can use an action on a denizen card they rule or one at their current site, paying the cost displayed on the line above the action text. Number 4 is that if you rule a site, a player can pick up or drop off any number of warbands, so long as one remains on the tile if they're taken. And finally, number 5, one that we touched on earlier, a player can peek at a face-down relic at their current site. And that is the minor actions done. So once a player finishes their actions on the turn, they move into the rest phase. As I said earlier, spent resources are removed from the map, favors spent to its relative favor bank, secrets returning to the player, and burnt resources returning to the shared supply. After this is done, a player refreshes their supply, first taking care to remember how many supply they currently have remaining. Then they increase their supply to a point that matches the number of warbands left next to their player board, and then add the number of supply they had remaining before they rested. Rest phase done, turn over. Right, so all that said, let's quickly return to our recover action, focusing on the banners. Here, these are treated just like relics. For one to enter the game, a player simply has to pay more resources of a resource than currently situated on it. The catch is though, once in the game, they can still be recovered by other players or seized through campaigns. Let's begin with the Banner of the People. The first time you take this one from the play area, it only has 1 favor on it, so you could pay 2 favor or more to take it. When taken, the old favor is removed and placed in favor banks one by one, beginning with the player's suit of choice, moving away from the world deck, wrapping around if needed. This old amount is then replaced with the new amount paid, making it even more expensive for it to be taken again. From this point on, its owning player must either pay 1 favor to it, or else remove 1 favor, adding it to the favor bank with the least amount of favor. And if it ever has 6 or more favor on it, it is flipped. Now, pause there. Holding the Banner of the People's favor contributes to the win conditions for the Oathkeeper of the People and Oathkeeper of Protection. So it's fair to say it's a pretty solid investment. Not only that though, it gives a special ability, and when searching, a player may first discard any denizen from their current region, and then when placing a denizen card, can place it again at any site within the region. Solid and very flexible. So, safe to say, if it becomes too guarded and the tile flips to its mob side, it becomes much more expensive to hold onto. Unpause. From here on, a player must pay favor to it twice each wake phase, lest it start paying out again to the poorest favor banks. Remember, the less favor the banner has, the more susceptible it is to being recovered by another player. If it is recovered by another player on their turn, it is taken as normal, with present favor being paid to the banks, then replaced with the new player's payment. Except it begins in its new home normal side up. Now, a player doesn't have to recover a banner to take it and instead could choose to seize it through a campaign action. Here, if seized correctly, the banner is then taken, mob side up, and then 2 of its existing favor are burnt. Note here that this banner can never have less than 1 favor on it, so if you can't burn all of them, burn as many as you can. The Banner of the Darkest Secret is largely quite similar, except it requires secrets to be paid when recovered. It begins out of play with 1, so it can be recovered with 2 or more. Holding the Banner of the Darkest Secret contributes to the Oathkeeper of Devotion and the Oathkeeper of Protection again, but it also grants a special ability to its owner, and when they search, they only need to spend 2 supply, and not the costs printed on the map. Very nice. Like the Banner of the People, this too can be recovered by other players, except it can only be taken if the current owning player's pawn is at a site where a denizen exists that does not match the suit of one in their advisors. This restriction does not exist though if a player recovers them from themselves or is taking the banner for the first time from the supply. Like I said, secrets must be paid when recovering the banner. Of the secrets currently on the banner, The recovering player takes 1 into their supply, with any others previously placed taken back by their previous owner. The new secrets are then added to the banner, and the transfer of ownership is complete. Just like the people's favour, this banner can also be seized through campaign, and if it is up to 2 secrets must be burned, again leaving a minimum of 1 in place. Alright, so with banners done, we just have a few more things to cover for our first game. Firstly, sites. Most of these guys have unique powers, usage of which is outlined on the player aid. I mentioned earlier the false vision conspiracy. Any player can play this one. Burning 1 secret to steal a relic or banner from a pawn at your pawn's site, with the condition that you must have at least 2 advisors matching one of the players whose relic is being stolen. Finally, we have citizens. Citizens can come into play at the whim of the Chancellor. Should the Chancellor see it fit, maybe one player is becoming too strong for them to handle, they can offer to make them a citizen as a minor action, promising them one of the relics from the Imperial Reliquary. The offered player may accept or reject the offer, but if they accept, they flip their board over and convert their warbands to purple. For the Chancellor, losing relics from the Imperial Reliquary actually changes the way some of their actions are resolved. Now, this ability to create citizens is tied to the Grand Scepter. So if lost, for example through a campaign, the ability to grant citizenship is lost with it and gained by the new owner, meaning it's possible for citizens and exiles alike to create new citizens. Citizens are unique in that they cannot achieve victory through stealing the Oathkeeper title or becoming a visionary. Instead, for them to win, the Chancellor must first achieve victory by ending the game with their Oathkeeper title intact. If they do, a citizen may in fact win if they meet the successor goal listed on the Oathkeeper card. As said earlier, these goals almost mirroring that of the other Oathkeeper tiles. The successor to the Oathkeeper of Supremacy will be a citizen if they hold more relics and banners than the Chancellor. The successor to the Oathkeeper of Devotion will be a citizen holding the Grand Scepter. The successor to the Oathkeeper of Protection will be the citizen that holds the people's favour. And finally, the successor to the Oathkeeper of the People will be the citizen holding the Darkest Secret. So that is a big change to the end goals, but that is not all that changes when playing as a citizen. Firstly, when citizens rest, as they don't have any warbands of their own colour, they simply replenish their supply up to the amount that their Chancellor has, gaining additional supply if they had any left unspent. Second, if they were to pick up or drop off warbands from their board, they would at first need the Chancellor's permission to do so. Thirdly, sites controlled by citizens count towards the Chancellor's Oathkeeper of Supremacy. They are purple warbands after all. And lastly, well, there's a few extra modifiers for campaigns. Usually, and this sort of affects the next couple of points, a citizen is considered to be an Imperial player along with the Chancellor. However, if they campaign against the Chancellor or the Chancellor campaigns against them, they are not considered as such. What that means, we'll see right here. If an Imperial player is the target of another player's campaign, the Chancellor will join as an ally in defense, as well as any other citizen whose pawn is in a location targeted by the attacker. Should they choose, any of their battle plans or campaign modifying rules can be used, as well as any advisor powers. However, these must be paid by the player controlling the advisor. Next, if an Imperial player's pawn is in the location of a defending Imperial player, the warbands on their player board are combined with that of the defending player. And finally, if an Imperial player's forces are defeated, the Chancellor chooses which warbands are killed, with all remaining at sites, returning to the Chancellor's player board. Now, should a Chancellor feel they've made the wrong decision in appointing a citizen, they're now kind of in the running to win the game, and they still hold the scepter, they can return the citizen to exile by paying them 5 favour with a few modifiers. 1 more if the exiled holds the Oathkeeper tile, and 1 more if they hold the people's favour. 1 less though if the Chancellor holds the Oathkeeper title. and again 1 less if they hold the people's favour. Once exiled, the ex-citizen flips their board, replaces all purple warbands with those in their colour, and refresh their supply to the leftmost space. Now, citizens can also self-exile if they choose, by giving a number of favour tokens equal to the number of their secrets, plus the number of warbands on their board, to the player holding the Grand Scepter. Of course, if that player is the one exiling themselves, well, they just can't exile. The Grand Scepter holds far too much responsibility. Again though, the process is the same, with the ex-citizen flipping their board, replacing their warbands, and replenishing their supply. The very last thing we're going to cover here is what actually happens once a game is won. Either 8 rounds of the game has passed, the Chancellor has won off the roll of a dice, a citizen has succeeded their Chancellor, or an exile has become a visionary, or in this case, the usurper. Here the game is over and we record a chronicle setting up for the next game to be played. Now, just for kicks, I played another intro game, this time the orange player for me, coming away with usurper. The Chancellor put up a very nice final battle to try and wrestle away some of his last points of control, but an amazing roll on the blue dice there prevented that, and orange comes away as the victor. So, for packing up, there are 8 steps to be taken before the game is ready to go away, and these are all nicely laid out on the Chronicle summary card. First thing to happen is the winner must vow a new oath, choosing the Oathkeeper goal for the next game. Now, for example, if the game had been won by a visionary, the Oathkeeper goal chosen must match the Vision 1, but otherwise a player can choose any other Oathkeeper. This is placed in the world box. I'm thinking we go for all-out chaos next game, so I'm going to throw in the Oathkeeper of Protection, so that everyone is fighting for relics and banners. Next, if the winning player was an exile, they can offer citizenship to any player not already a citizen. If the offered player accepts, they replace all their warbands with those in the winning player's colour. For this game here, blue came exceptionally close to becoming a visionary with the Vision of Sanctuary, so orange will offer citizenship to blue. Now, as there are no blue warbands on the map, the title won't change that much this game, but it should make for a fairly interesting start on the next. Next, we clean up the map. This kind of has a couple of steps. Here, if the winning player was the Chancellor, they must first decide whether to either build a new edifice, replacing a denizen at a site they rule, or repair one that has already fallen into ruin. Edifice cards are located in the archive and are treated largely the same as denizen cards when placed on the map, having both actions and powers, and being usable for things like trade and muster. They are, however, a lot more permanent than denizens, and only one edifice can ever be placed at any site. Whether an edifice was built, repaired, or nothing was done at all, as is the case here, we finally get to remove cards from the board. At all sites not ruled by the winner or situated with an intact edifice, we discard all denizens and sites, return all relics to their deck, and returned all ruined edifices to the archive. We would then flip over all edifices at sites not ruled by winners to their ruined side, and discard all denizens at their site too. We then return all pawns, warbands, favour, and secrets to the box. So, finishing our cleanup, we have to rebuild the map. First pushing all sites without edifice ruins towards the top of the cradle, top to bottom of each region. Then, if we had any sites remaining with edifice ruins, we would push them towards the bottom of the hinterlands, bottom to top. In this case, as we have no edifice ruins yet, all remaining sites are pushed towards the top of the cradle. We now return discarded sites to the site deck, shuffle up, and then deal out to fill all remaining empty sites face down. Moving on, now we cycle in some new cards. First, we determine the suit the winner has most in their pool of advisors, and winner chooses if tied. Then we add 3 cards from that suit, 2 cards from the next, and then finally 1 more from the next in line, in the order of the suits printed on the board. So now that we've added some new cards, we have to remove some to balance it out. Setting aside all visions, we gather up all discarded cards and shuffle them together with all losing players' advisors. From this deck, we then randomly remove 6 cards, adding them to the archive in the Dispossessed section. These will not be seen again until their suit is exhausted from the archive. Next, we handle the relics. We gather up all the losing players' relics, shuffling them back into the main deck. Noting here that we ignore the Imperial Reliquary and any relics owned by the winning player. From this deck, we would set up all new relics for each site that needs them. And then, well, that is the world state for the next game. Next, we gather the winning player's relics and those remaining in the Imperial Reliquary. We shuffle them together and then add them to the top of the deck. These will be the first to reappear next game, with most returning to the Imperial Reliquary. Finally, and this is the bit where we actually get to pack up, we now stack all the sites, denizens, edifices, and relics in groups per their site, adding them into the world box. And then we finally rebuild the deck. We gather all denizen cards and make 3 piles. 10 cards, 15 cards, and then all remaining. To the first pile, we add 2 visions. To the second pile, we add 3. And then shuffling the now 18 card pile, we add that to the top of the remaining, shuffling the last pile, adding it to the top, and we place it in the archive. And with that said, we're ready for the next game, and the teach is done. And there we have it, guys and gals, a massive how to play there. This one really hit me for 6 going through the rulebook. I wasn't sure exactly what to make of it. I'd played through that introductory first turn for each player and I was like, but why? But how? And only in preparing for this video has this game really clicked for me. So I really hope this video is somewhat valuable to your learning experience as well. Now, Oath is a very complex game, so there's got to be a lot in there that I've either glossed over or missed completely just because of the breadth of what this game sets out to achieve. Every single one of the cards in this game is completely unique, changing the game, adding powers to the game in different ways. So it's going to be up to you to explore. And a lot of exploring you're going to have to do to get through the content here. With only 6 cards cycled in and out of the game every play, this is honestly a game on the shelf that is going to last a lifetime. Now, another thing I've failed to mention throughout this how to play is yes, there is a solo way to play. And after you get through that initial how to play that comes in the box, you are free to experience the rest of this as a solo experience. I can't speak for it just yet, and I'm hoping to get a couple of plays in over the next few weeks, mono and mono with me. But I gotta say, the ground rules that the game has set up for me, I can see just such a puzzly, fantastic solo experience ahead. So kind of stay tuned for that. Other than that though, guys and gals, I think we have covered just about everything. So if you've enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and do all the things that you guys can do to help this channel grow. But besides that, we are done. So as always, my name's Michael. This is Bits Aboard. We'll catch you next time.